Intro to Norse Paganism. For those that have seen my Intro to the Northern Path video, this is an update. Updated sources at the end of the video. What does it take to be heathen? To be Norse, or even Germanic pagan? Interest and study. That's it. You define your heathenry. This is your path, your life, your spiritual journey. No one else's. There's a pressure we all feel when trying to join something new, to fit the expectations of our desired in-group, Iningard. There's some merit in setting a standard, but ultimately, it's your own standard that matters. Keep that in mind when finding your own way. What is heathenry? Heathenry is the blanket umbrella term for Norse and Germanic paganism. There were many cultures and perceptions in the ancient world. The arch-heathens, those who were born and raised in heathen society before Christian colonizers forced conversion, varied widely. Different clans, regions, towns, and households, all with a wide variety of approaches to life and their religions, spanning across centuries. Today, heathenry encompasses many varieties and differences. Continental Germanic lore doesn't have Loki, for example, and ᚈᚏᚗᚏᚗ is the Pennsylvania Deutsch specific type of Germanic heathenry. Asatru is a popular term, but it's fairly modern and comes specifically from Icelandic Reconstruction. What is Reconstruction? Because heathenry was taken from us by imperialist Christians, we don't have any unbroken connection to their beliefs and practices. We must rebuild a religion based on what we have. Some modern Scandinavian practices reflect the arch-heathens, but they've been existing in the Christian overculture, so they aren't the same exact rites, nor would they have exact understanding of heathen theology. We can learn from them, but it must be understood in its time and context. We must, therefore, rebuild the religion of the arch-heathens. From old texts, archaeology, and second and third-hand accounts, we piece all this together and attempt to decipher what we can, reconstructing the past to go forward into the future. Theology, theo meaning God, ology meaning study of. In our case, this is trying to define the nature and existence of the gods. Omnitheists believe in all gods. Hard polytheists believe in separate gods with agency. Soft polytheism believes in an all that every god descends from. Archetypal polytheists are somewhere in between, believing in gods descending from a source pantheon. There are even pagans who don't work with gods, or pagans who don't believe in gods at all, atheist or atheopagans. All pagans are valid. Who amongst us possesses special insight to invalidate other pagan religious beliefs? I certainly don't know the correct way, and wouldn't want to dictate how you live and what to believe. For one, that's too much work. All pagans are valid, as long as your beliefs don't harm others. Gatekeeping based on race, creed, or theology is harmful. Dogma. Heresy does not exist in heathenry. We have no ecclesiarchy enforcing correct belief or enforcing orthodoxy, nor should we. Many come to paganism for an informal structure and more grassroots approach. Our structure is in the networks we establish, the frith bonds we share, not in some top-down priesthood amassing power through dogmatic orthodoxy. We must decide our own beliefs, not have them dictated to us. UPG. Unverified personal gnosis. Gnosis, or knowledge, about your spiritual beliefs and praxis that has not been verified by direct sources. This isn't to say it won't be verified, more that it can be, but hasn't. UPG is how we fill in the gaps of what cannot be constructed, theology and rites specific to you that make your religion into a spiritual system and practice. First step. So, what's your first step? This is it. Interest and seeking is the first step. You define your heathenry. You decide to call yourself Norse pagan, or Asatru, or even just capital H heathen. Nobody needs to give you a hammer or bless it with bodily fluids. You don't even need to wear a hammer. You can wear whatever you'd like. Mostly, it helps us find each other. Sources. Here's a few sources, outside of my channel, for learning about heathenry and deciding your path. They vary widely in opinion and interpretation, but that's good. Disagreement and discussion challenges us, and it makes us better. Soft introductions to lore. When I first started, I read a few things before the Eddas. The Eddas are great, but they can be a bit heavy if you're not used to the content or language. Children of Odin by Padraic, a children's book author who wrote a more digestible version of the lore. This was one of the first books I read. Norse Mythology by Neil Gaiman. Like Padraic, it's a more easily digestible modern interpretation. Almighty Johnson's. This was a good series that helped my wife learn about the lore. It's a comedy show with an interesting interpretation. It's also just a fun show to watch. Recommended reading: Eddas. When it comes to any translation, multiple sources are best. Translators will often use biased words, and kind of have to, as exact one-for-one words wouldn't match the grammar and syntax of English. Jackson Crawford has a great Poetic Edda, as well as some of the other sagas, in plain, easy-to-understand English. Librivox has both Eddas for free in audiobook form online. It was a good listen, but the narrator is drier than stale bread and less interesting. But if you familiarize yourself with the lore, it can be good on a long drive. ᚁᚾᚏᚗᚗᚗ by Diana Paxson, another early read for me. It familiarizes you with many modern heathen concepts and traditions. Diana Paxson is the former steer of the Troth. Asatru for Beginners by Mathias Nordvig. Dr. Nordvig is a colleague of Jackson Crawford's. They used to teach at University of Colorado Boulder. Nordvig is a Dane who was raised heathen, giving him an interesting academic insight. YouTube. Here's a few YouTubers I found to be helpful. If they have a TikTok, I will also put that in the description below. Jackson Crawford. Since I mentioned him before, Dr. Jackson Crawford has a PhD in Scandinavian Studies and a Master's in Linguistics, giving him an in-depth academic perspective. He's not heathen, so he lacks the bias that many heathen academics hold. Steady has a different bias. Nordic Animism. Another academic, ᚁᚾᚏᚗᚗᚗᚗ, is a historian of religion PhD. He has an interesting approach to heathenry, coming from an education in both Sweden and Denmark. He's well known for his runic calendar, and often comes at it from an unusual angle. Midgard Musings. A heathen Vidki, often translated as wizard. I find his videos to be great refreshers. I often go back to him from time to time. Very balanced perspective. He also has a podcast called Random Heathen Ramblings. Eric Wordweaver Sjerven. A Gothi out of East Texas. He also has a very balanced view and a very down-to-earth, grassroots approach that is very digestible. Arith Harger. Another channel with an academic background. Arith works in archaeology. He's ᚁᚾᚗᚗᚗᚗ, which is a more left-hand path kind of heathenry. Darling. She doesn't focus on heathenry, but if you're interested in the occult, magic, or the esoteric in general, Georgina Rose is a great source, very knowledgeable about a lot within the sphere of paganism and the occult. Angela's Symposium, another great academic content creator. She has a PhD in anthropology of religion. She hasn't stated her personal practice, I asked, but she has alchemical symbols tattooed on her arms, so she's obviously well versed in the esoteric as well as academic practices. Again, not specifically Norse, but if you're interested in magic, the occult, or just want to learn more about broad pagan concepts, this is a good channel. The Tempest Witch. This is a Nordic channel. She has a very good approach to modern witchcraft. I found her more herbal-focused videos particularly useful. It can be difficult to find reliable Sather content because the historical sources are scant at best. But I found her channel to be useful and informative. Podcasts. Heathen History Podcast. This one goes in depth about the history of heathenry in the modern era. One of the hosts, Lauren Crow, is the current steer of the Troth. Her co-host, Ben Wagner, is part of her kindred and does gobs of research for each episode. Nordic Mythology Podcast. This is Mathias Nordvig's podcast. He used to have a YouTube channel, but has since moved everything towards the podcast. If you recall, I mentioned earlier that he's both a heathen Dane and an academic. That's what I recommend for beginners, or people looking to expand their Norse pagan knowledge. It can seem like a lot, but don't let it. Don't feel like you need to know everything. You can't. Instead, research what you can, and follow your interests. No two heathens are alike, and disagreements should make us better, not bitter. People correct me all the time, and I've been at this since 2006, and around paganism much longer. You don't have to fit anyone's mold. Your standard should be your own. Think of it like this. Thor would solve a problem different than Loki. Loki would look at a situation differently than Freya. And Freya will approach something in a different way than Odin. None are wrong, just different people on different paths. And for that matter, none were born perfect. The gods, like us, have flaws. Odin wasn't born all-wise. He had to struggle and sacrifice to become the wise wandering Senex we know today. Be better tomorrow than you were yesterday. We are the sum of our actions.
Skull!